The clatter of dishes echoed from the kitchen, but none were set for me. My stomach growled as the scent of lentils and ghee drifted down the hallway, but I was invisible. My daughter-in-law looked right past me, her voice sweet only when speaking to my son. "He's already eaten," she lied. I hadn't. Not since yesterday. That night, I sat in my own home, hungry, humiliated, and haunted by a question I never thought I'd ask: was this how my story was going to end? I was never a rich man, not by money, at least. But I poured wealth into my family in ways money could never measure. I worked 38 years as a postman, my legs pounding pavement in monsoon rains and summer heat. My hands went numb in the winters, but I never once missed a delivery. I saved every spare rupee in an old biscuit tin under our bed, dreaming of a better life for my son, Raghav. My wife, Savita, and I built our home brick by brick. She chose the marigold tiles in the kitchen, and I built the wooden shelves myself, chipped, but sturdy. Our home wasn't big, but it breathed warmth. Laughter filled its corners during Diwali, and the smell of fresh rotis rolled through the windows each morning. That kitchen, where now I sit in silence, once held music, clatter, and voices that called me Babuji with love. Raghav was our only child. We weren't blessed with more, and perhaps that made us pour double into him. I remember buying him his first bicycle, paid in monthly installments. He was 10, and his smile that day felt like sunlight. I would wake at 5 a.m. to iron his school uniform, packing his lunch with trembling, sleep-deprived hands, and walk him to the bus stop just to see him off with a kiss on his forehead. When he got into engineering college, I cried in the temple. I sold my father's wristwatch to pay his first semester fees. Never once did I hesitate. That's what fathers do: we build ladders with our own bones so our children can climb higher than we ever dreamed. Years passed, and my back bent more with each one. My wife passed quietly one winter night, no final words, just a silence that swallowed our room whole. Since then, I kept her side of the bed untouched. Her shawl still hangs on the back of the kitchen chair, a silent witness to everything I've endured since. When Raghav married, I thought I was gaining a daughter. In those early days, my daughter-in-law, Priya, was soft-spoken, respectful. She touched my feet, brought me tea, and laughed at my old jokes. I let myself believe the warmth would continue. I even rewrote my will, ensuring the house would belong to them someday. I thought it was the right thing to do. But slowly, things changed. Tea was no longer offered. Conversations grew shorter. The marigold tiles I'd once polished were now walked over without notice. My presence became background noise. I chalked it up to stress, modern life, but the pit in my stomach deepened. I began eating alone. No one asked if I'd had breakfast. Sometimes, they ordered food for two, and I wasn't one of the two. My son, once eager to sit by my side and recount his day, now looked at his phone during dinner. And Priya? She barely looked at me at all. But I stayed quiet. That's what old men do, isn't it? We swallow our pride, smile through the silence, and pray the warmth returns. I told myself it was just a phase. I reminded myself of the little boy with the bicycle, the one who used to hold my hand so tightly crossing the street. I clung to that memory like a lifeline. But memories don't keep you warm when the tea never arrives. And dignity, once eroded, doesn't rebuild itself. Little did I know, the deepest cut was yet to come. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember because the neighbor's child had come by earlier, asking if I'd seen his cricket ball. I had bent down, slowly, creaking knees and all, to help him search beneath the bushes. That small moment of laughter with the boy reminded me of a time when my own son clung to my legs and called me hero. But heroes don't go hungry in their own homes. That evening, the smell of cooking drifted from the kitchen, mustard seeds popping in hot oil, the crackle of curry leaves, the familiar scent of dal. My stomach stirred. I waited patiently, as I always did. But the wait grew longer. I heard 2 plates being set. Chairs scraping. The sound of Priya's soft laugh. And then, silence. No 3rd plate. No call for Babuji. Just the murmur of their dinner conversation, behind a half-closed door. I walked toward the dining area, heart already sinking. I tried to keep my voice steady. Priya beta, is there some food for me too? She looked at me, pausing mid-bite. Oh, she said, blinking. We thought you already ate. I made just enough for the 2 of us today. Just enough. For the first time, I noticed that the dining table, once a place where 4, sometimes 5 chairs gathered during festivals, now had only 2 plates laid out. My son looked away, chewing slowly, as if he didn't want to be part of the moment unraveling before him. No problem, I mumbled. I'll just make some toast. But the fridge was empty. The bread was stale. Even the kettle refused to boil properly. I sat in my room with a glass of water. My stomach ached, but the hunger wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something that no food could fix. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought, is this how respect dies? Not with a slap or a scream, but with silence, with a missing plate. I remembered how many nights I stayed up when Raghav had fever. I used to crush tulsi leaves, boil them into tea, and sit by his side, wiping his sweat. I remembered walking 5 kilometers once just to buy his favorite sweet before his birthday. And now, no plate. Not even a question. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. Told myself she simply forgot. Told myself they were tired. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't forgetfulness. This was a message. You don't matter anymore. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet, like dust settling in an old room. But it suffocated all the same. My son never said a word. That's what hurt most. His silence screamed. From that day on, I stopped waiting for dinner. I boiled my own rice when they weren't home. I started eating in my room, quietly, like a tenant renting a corner of the house I once built with calloused hands. I asked myself questions I never thought I'd ask. Is this what all those years of sacrifice earned me? How did I go from being the head of the house, to being its shadow? Have you ever felt invisible in your own home, overlooked by the very people you sacrificed everything for? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story too. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Something inside me shifted that day. I didn't say a word, but I started to see things differently. I started to watch, not just what they did, but what they stopped doing. And what I saw, only deepened the cracks. After that night, something in the house changed, and not just in me. The warmth that once wrapped around our family like an old shawl had been quietly folded away. What remained was cold politeness, like distant neighbors sharing a wall but not a life. Priya stopped pretending. There were no more fake smiles or forced pleasantries. She treated me like a worn-out decoration, too old to throw away, too useless to display. I noticed how she began locking the kitchen cupboard. The same cupboard that once overflowed with treats for Raghav now held biscuits behind a lock and key. If I wanted tea, I had to ask, and when I did, her answer was always the same, we're low on milk, Babuji. But somehow, there was always a fresh glass for Raghav every morning. I stopped asking. One morning, I tried to heat water for my bath. The gas cylinder had run out. When I told Priya, she shrugged. We'll order a new one next week. Use cold water till then. Her voice was so casual, so indifferent, I almost believed I'd imagined her kindness years ago. It wasn't just physical neglect, it was emotional erasure. They no longer consulted me about anything. The newspaper subscription I'd kept for years was cancelled without asking. The old armchair in the veranda, where I used to sit and read, was moved to the storage room. I wasn't just being pushed aside, I was being erased, detail by detail, as if I'd never mattered. One evening, guests arrived, friends of Raghav and Priya. I came out of my room, excited to meet them, to be part of something again. I straightened my kurta, combed my thinning hair. But as I walked into the living room, I heard Priya whisper, "Just ignore him. He's old and talks too much." They laughed. Quietly, but I heard it. That laughter cut deeper than any insult. I stood there, pretending I hadn't heard. My feet rooted to the floor, my smile frozen. Then I turned and walked back to my room. I closed the door slowly, because if I let it slam, it would have betrayed the storm inside me. That night, I couldn't help but remember a winter evening many years ago. Raghav had broken his arm falling from a tree. I stayed up all night rubbing oil on his shoulder, telling him stories to help him sleep. He'd looked up at me with tear-filled eyes and said, "You're the strongest person in the world, Papa." And now, I was nothing more than a burden they tiptoed around. The more I stayed silent, the more they mistook my silence for weakness. They no longer waited for me at the dinner table. They left the house without telling me where they were going. Sometimes, I sat on the front steps waiting, like a dog hoping its master might return. And Raghav, my son, said nothing. That's what broke me most. Not the food, not the chair, not even the cold water. It was his silence. The boy who once ran to me when he scraped his knee, now looked right through me. And yet, I said nothing. Because part of me still hoped. Hoped that maybe it was stress, maybe she was having a hard time, maybe he would wake up one morning and remember who I was. What I had done. What we had shared. But hope is a fragile thing. And mine was beginning to splinter. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies. I just wanted to be seen. But the more I stayed in that house, the more I realized, I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't even a man. I was just an old photo in a cracked frame. And the frame was beginning to gather dust. The final crack came not with shouting, but with silence, again. It was a Sunday. Raghav's birthday. I had spent the morning quietly preparing his favorite sweet, suji halwa, just like his mother used to make it. I had to ask the neighbor for ghee because Priya had stopped keeping any in the house. I stirred the pot slowly, my hand trembling as the aroma filled the kitchen. I even wrapped an old watch of mine, my father's, passed down through generations, in newspaper and tied it with a thin red string. It was all I had left of value. When they returned home that afternoon, I greeted them at the door, smiling. "Happy birthday, Beta," I said. Priya walked past me without a word. Raghav looked down at his phone and mumbled, "Thanks, Papa." I held out the plate of halwa. "I made this for you. Like old times." He glanced at it, then at Priya. She raised her eyebrow, just slightly. He hesitated, then said, "We just ate out. Maybe later. Maybe later." He didn't even take a bite. Didn't even pretend. They went into their room and shut the door. I stood there holding the plate, the steam slowly fading, along with the last flicker of hope in my chest. I sat down at the table, alone. I picked up the spoon and ate a few bites myself. But the sweetness burned my throat. I pushed the plate away, my appetite lost to the lump in my chest. That evening, as they laughed behind closed doors, I opened my cupboard and took out an old photo album. Raghav at 3, covered in cake. Raghav at 7, on his bicycle. Raghav at 16, standing beside me proudly with his school trophy. I had framed his life with my sacrifices. I had given everything, never asking for anything in return. All I wanted was to be remembered. To be respected. To be loved. I looked around my room, bare walls, a creaky fan, a bed that sagged in the middle. A home I had built, now a prison. And I wasn't even allowed a spoonful of peace in it. That night, I stood in the hallway and watched their door, closed, always closed. I remembered when every door in this house was open. When laughter spilled from room to room. When my name wasn't something they avoided saying out loud. My fingers clenched at my sides. My breathing became shallow. Something snapped, not in anger, but in realization. They didn't care. Not a little. Not at all. And if I stayed silent any longer, would disappear entirely. I walked back into my room and sat at the edge of the bed. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry, not a loud, messy cry. Just quiet tears that rolled down my cheeks without permission. Tears I hadn't shed even when Savita passed. Because this pain, this was deeper. This was betrayal by the very person I gave my life to. I looked at my trembling hands and asked myself something I never had the courage to before. What am I doing here? Why am I allowing myself to be treated like a ghost in my own house? No one else would change things for me. So I had to change them myself. Not with shouting. Not with drama. But with purpose. That night, I stayed awake, not from sorrow, but from clarity. I knew now what I had to do. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be obvious. But it would be felt. They had forgotten who I was. What I was capable of. They were about to remember. I began with the cupboard. Buried beneath a stack of old shawls and yellowing books was a steel tin I hadn't touched in years. Inside were papers, faded, folded, but still intact. Property deeds. Receipts. My original will. Everything I once thought I'd never need again. It had been years since I looked at them. I had signed everything over to Raghav after his marriage. I thought it was an act of love, of trust. I told myself, let the boy have the house. Let them live peacefully. I never imagined peace would cost me my place in it. That night, I lit a dim lamp and started reading, line by line, remembering every sacrifice stitched into each signature. The land in my village, left to me by my father. The fixed deposit I opened when Raghav was born. The old insurance policy I never cancelled, just in case. They thought I had nothing left. But they were wrong. My hands trembled as I unfolded each document. Not because of age, but because I could feel something returning. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. The next morning, I walked slowly to the local notary office. No one noticed I was gone. I sat under the peeling paint of that building for nearly an hour, waiting for my number. When the clerk called me in, I pulled out the papers and quietly asked, "How can I change a will?" He looked up, surprised, perhaps wondering what business a frail old man had with legacies and law. But I wasn't frail. Not inside. Not anymore. That week, I met with an old friend, Mr. Sharma, a retired lawyer who used to play chess with me in the park before his knees gave out. When I explained my situation, he nodded solemnly. He didn't ask too many questions. He just said, "It's not too late. But you'll need to do it carefully." So I did. Every evening, while Raghav and Priya watched television or scrolled on their phones, I sat in my room with old files, letters, and notes. I began rewriting my will, this time, with precision. I added clauses. Restrictions. Protections. I contacted a small charitable trust in our town that supported elderly care. I arranged a clause for them to inherit part of the estate if I were to pass without being given medical care or shelter. A small move, but a powerful one. Then I made a quiet trip to the bank. Changed nominees. Updated signatures. Transferred a few savings to my name only. I moved silently, like mist slipping through closed windows. They never noticed. But I watched everything. I watched how Priya took the last piece of fruit from the fridge, knowing I hadn't eaten. I watched how Rugov laughed at videos on his phone while I coughed through the night without a glass of water. I watched, and I remembered. Every act of neglect became a brick in the foundation I was now rebuilding, not for them, but for myself. One night, I sat in my room and lit incense, just like Savita used to do. Her photo sat on the shelf, smiling gently in black and white. I looked up at her and whispered, "They forgot who I am. But I won't let them forget what I've done." I could almost hear her voice in the breeze that passed through the window. Dignity is quiet, but it is not weak. And so, I waited. Planned. Prepared. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it walks with a cane, speaks in calm words, and signs its name slowly at the bottom of a page that changes everything. It started with a letter. Not loud words. Not accusations. Just a carefully folded piece of paper, left quietly on the dining table, under Rugov's teacup one morning. I watched from the hallway as he picked it up and frowned, reading the first lines with furrowed brows. He didn't speak right away. But his fingers twitched, and he reread it twice. Priya was in the kitchen. She didn't notice the shift in his posture. Or maybe she did, and pretended not to. That letter simply read. Dear son. This house was built with more than bricks. It was built with sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and 1,000 quiet sacrifices. If you and your wife feel I am no longer welcome at the table I paid for, then let us make things clear, legally. I've begun revisiting the ownership of this property. This letter is not a threat, but a reminder. I was not born to be forgotten. It wasn't fiery. It wasn't cruel. But it landed like thunder in the calm. That evening, Rugov knocked on my door, a rarity in itself. His face was stiff, unsure. Papa, what is this? He asked, holding the letter. I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in weeks. It's the truth, I said simply. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked down, as if he couldn't bear to meet the face of the man he had abandoned by silence. You could have talked to me, he muttered. I did, I replied, voice quiet. Every time I ate alone. Every time I asked for tea and got excuses. Every night you closed the door and left me to listen to laughter I wasn't invited to. His shoulders sank. That night, there was tension in the house, no shouting, just a heavy silence that hovered in every corner. Priya avoided me entirely. Rugov sat alone in the living room, reading the letter again and again. The next day, I made another quiet move. I brought home a notarized copy of my revised will and left it in my room, unlocked. Not hidden. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to know I wasn't bluffing. And they did. 2 days later, Priya greeted me at breakfast with a brittle smile and a cup of tea. Good morning, Babuji, she said. I looked at her, calm but unmoved. Thank you, I said, taking the cup, but please don't do it out of guilt. I'm not thirsty for pity. That was the beginning. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand apologies. But I stopped lowering my head. I began sitting at the dinner table again, whether they wanted me there or not. I started turning on the lights in the hallway, the ones they always switched off to keep me from wandering at night. I walked with slower steps, but with purpose. My presence could no longer be erased. Each act was a quiet declaration, I'm still here. And I won't disappear quietly. Rugov, to his credit, began to soften. He'd sit a little longer in the living room. He started asking, how was your day, Papa? Small words, yes, but in this house, they were earthquakes. But Priya, her silence was not peace. It was pressure building behind a dam. And I could feel it coming. Tell me in the comments, if someone you loved started treating you like a stranger, would you fight for your place? Would you forgive, or finally walk away? I knew this was only the beginning. The real confrontation was yet to come. And when it did, they wouldn't see it coming. It came on a day like any other, sunlight filtering through the windows, birds chirping beyond the balcony, the soft clang of utensils from the kitchen. But beneath that ordinary morning lay a shift that neither Raghav nor Priya could ignore any longer. I had an unexpected visitor. Mr. Sharma, my lawyer friend, arrived in a crisp white kurta, carrying a leather folder. He smiled warmly as I welcomed him into the living room. Raghav looked up from the sofa, startled, the color draining slightly from his face. "Papa, who is this?" he asked. Before I could speak, Mr. Sharma answered with practiced ease. "I'm here regarding a few documents your father has been updating. It's all standard legal procedure." Priya appeared at the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel, suddenly very alert. I could see it in their eyes, the first spark of fear. Not anger. Not guilt. Fear. I sat down calmly and gestured for Mr. Sharma to begin. He opened the folder and began explaining the revised will, the reallocation of assets, the conditional clauses, the protective measures I had now built into my legacy. He mentioned that portions of the estate would be redirected to charity in the event of my mistreatment or negligence. He spoke of new witnesses, new terms, and official filings already in progress. Raghav blinked rapidly, the way he used to when he was caught lying as a boy. Priya's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. "This is ridiculous," Raghav finally muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "You don't need to do all this, Papa. We've taken care of you." I turned my gaze to him, steady, unblinking. "No, you've tolerated me. There's a difference." He flinched, and silence settled between us. Mr. Sharma packed up his folder and left quietly, leaving the echo of his visit ringing through the house like a bell that wouldn't stop tolling. That evening, dinner was served with 3 plates. Raghav sat across from me, fidgeting with his food. Priya, for once, didn't have her phone beside her. No one spoke much. But the silence had changed, it wasn't dismissal anymore. It was caution. Hesitation. Awareness. I had become visible again. I didn't need to shout or demand respect. I had simply reminded them of something they had conveniently forgotten, that the man they now saw as a burden was the same man who built every beam in this house, who gave up everything so they could live comfortably, who could just as easily take back what he once gave so freely. And just like that, the power shifted. The next morning, I found a note on my bedside table. It was from Raghav. "Papa, I'm sorry. I don't know when I stopped seeing you. I'll do better. Please don't push us away." I folded the note and placed it under my pillow. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And something is what I'd been waiting for. Later that day, I walked through the house with a new kind of clarity. Not bitterness, just understanding. I ran my fingers along the marigold tiles in the kitchen, the ones Savita chose decades ago. I stood on the balcony and felt the breeze on my face. I watched Priya set 3 cups of tea on the table, without being asked. I wasn't naive. I knew one note and a few kind gestures couldn't undo years of neglect. But I also knew this, they would never again look at me as if I didn't exist. The fear of losing comfort had reminded them of what they had taken for granted. They remembered who I was. Not just an old man. A father. A builder. A man with dignity. And dignity, once reclaimed, has a way of haunting those who tried to bury it. 3 weeks after Mr. Sharma's visit, the house felt quieter. Not in the cold, isolating way it once had. This silence had weight. Reflection. Awareness. Raghav began speaking to me with the care of a man who had just realized he'd been asleep at the wheel for years. He offered tea without prompting, asked if I needed anything from the market. Small things, yes, but genuine. Measured. Priya was slower to change. Her movements around me were calculated, cautious. She tried politeness, but it lacked warmth. I didn't mind. I wasn't seeking affection, I was enforcing boundaries. I had made it clear, kindness was not a favor. It was my due. Then one evening, justice came knocking. Quite literally. A representative from the charity trust one had included in my new will arrive to conduct a routine welfare check, as per our new agreement. They had been instructed to visit once every 2 months, to ensure I was being treated with basic dignity. If not, the clause would activate, 40% of the property and savings would go directly to their cause. The look on Priya's face when she opened the door was something I will never forget. That brief flash of panic, smoothed over by a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Babuji is very well taken care of," she said sweetly. "Please, come in." I sat calmly at the table while the young woman from the trust asked me gentle questions, about my meals, my rest, my access to medical care. I answered honestly. No embellishments. Just facts. When she left, Raghav closed the door and turned to me. "You really did it," he said. Not angrily. Not sarcastically. Just, surprised. "Yes," I replied. "I did." That night, they cooked my favorite meal. Not as a bribe, but perhaps as an offering. A gesture of acknowledgement. And when I sat down at the dinner table, Priya brought a bowl of warm kheer and placed it in front of me. "Made with extra cardamom, Babuji," she said, softly. I didn't smile. But I nodded. They were beginning to understand something vital: respect doesn't flow one way. It is earned, yes, but it must also be remembered. Maintained. Watered, like a plant. Or else it withers. A few days later, Raghav brought me a small gift. A new walking stick, lightweight, polished, with a curved wooden handle. "Thought it might be easier on your hands," he said. I took it, ran my fingers over the grain. "Thank you," I said. "But I've been walking just fine without it." Still, I kept it. Not because I needed it. But because he finally remembered that I was still standing. That month, I made one final visit to the bank. I didn't change anything. I just updated the paperwork to reflect one more name on the beneficiary list, my late wife. I wanted her name on that legacy too. Because none of this would have existed without her strength behind my silence. Justice wasn't revenge. It wasn't about humiliating them or throwing them out. Justice, for me, was this: being seen. Being heard. Having my sacrifices recognized, not as ancient history, but as the foundation they still stood on. And now, they knew what was at stake. Not money. Not property. But memory. Dignity. Legacy. Do you believe that dignity is more valuable than wealth? Have you ever seen karma arrive quietly, just when it was needed most? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe some things in life should never be forgotten. I didn't reclaim everything. Some wounds still ached. Some silences still stung. But what I did reclaim was enough. And now, I could finally breathe in my own home again. This morning, the sun filtered gently through the curtains. The smell of cardamom tea drifted in from the kitchen, and for once, the house didn't feel like a stranger to me. I sat on the veranda in my old armchair, yes, the same one they had once tucked away in storage like a relic of the past. It's back where it belongs now. Beside the potted tulsi, facing the rising sun. I sip my tea slowly, both hands wrapped around the cup. Not because it's cold, but because it's mine. And I finally feel like I belong here again. Raghav leaves for work with a brief nod and a quiet, "Take care, Papa." Not overly affectionate. But present. Acknowledging. Priya placed a soft wool shawl over the armrest before leaving for her errands this morning. She didn't say anything. Just placed it there. Maybe it was habit. Maybe guilt. Or maybe, maybe it was her way of apologizing. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Because some things don't need words. Just action. Over the past few weeks, things haven't become perfect. But they've become real. They see me now. Not just as an old man wandering their hallways, but as the foundation beneath their feet. As someone who carried their lives before they could carry themselves. Some evenings, Rugov sits with me. He talks about work. Politics. Even cricket, though he knows my knees ache just hearing about it. And sometimes, he just sits in silence beside me, and that's enough. One night, I told him about the sleepless nights during his exams. How I once pawned my wedding ring to pay for his hostel fees. He looked at me for a long moment and said quietly, "I don't deserve you, Papa." I didn't respond. He already knew. You see, we don't raise children for gratitude. But we do hope for respect. And when that respect fades, it's not just painful, it's erasure. Like being buried before death. I don't know how many years I have left. Some mornings, my bones creak louder than my thoughts. My hands tremble more often. And sometimes, I forget where I put my glasses, or why I entered a room. But what I won't forget, is who I am. Not a burden. Not a guest. Not a ghost. I am the man who built this house. Who buried dreams so that his son could dream bigger. Who sat through silence and chose dignity over destruction. Who, even when forgotten, never forgot how to rise. I hope my story reaches someone out there who's sitting in silence right now, wondering if it's too late to be seen. Let me tell you this, it's never too late to reclaim your place. To remind the world, gently but firmly, that your story didn't end just because others stopped reading it. If you've loved someone, raised someone, given pieces of yourself for someone, you are not weak. You are the foundation. And foundations do not crumble. Not when they've been built with love and sacrifice. As I sit here watching the sparrows hop across the railing, I feel something I hadn't in a long time, peace. Not the kind that comes from silence. But the kind that comes from being heard again. My name is still on the deed. But more importantly, it's back in their hearts. And that, my friend, is enough.